We're live. Let's go. Great way to start this off. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. With us tonight is head of video analysis at McKeen's Hockey, Will Scouch. Will, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Matt and Bennett. Thank you very much for having me.
He goes by Benet now. I just wanted.
We had Graham Nichols on our show a couple weeks ago, and he wanted to clarify what Bennett's name was because he's had a lot of mispronunciations of his own name, and so he asked Bennett if Bennett's name was Benet, and we had a good chuckle. So.
It's like every elementary school teacher I've ever had.
Right. So you're used to it then.
I'm used to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess while we're waiting for people to filter in here, I'll do the social media posts. But while we're waiting on them, I was just going to ask you to kick things off before we get into the nitty gritty of this year's group of prospects. What do you think about Ottawa's current young core? You know, with guys under 23 or under, they have Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson, Tim Stützle, Alex Formenton are already all on the roster. Sanderson's on his way shortly. And just what do you think of the current crop of young guys that the Sens have there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Sens, it's a lot of really good. You know, like there's a lot of good to very good NHL prospects. You know, like I like Jake Sanderson quite a bit. I think he's going to be a rock solid NHL defenseman at the very worst. Ridley Gregg is on the way. I think he could be, serve a certain type of NHL player that teams are certainly looking for. Like you mentioned, all those guys you mentioned, Tim Stützle, I've been a little bit disappointed with this season, but it's not, I also accept that like he hasn't been, like you can't sit here and be like, he's a bad hockey player. Like you can still see the sort of wheels turning in the right direction for him. Alex Formenton, I mean, the guy's going to be 23 next year. If he's a 40 point guy now for you, like that's a middle six guy. Like it seems like Ottawa can at least fill out most of a competitive NHL lineup, which is a good thing. And there are other guys on the way that I think could bolster that even more. I still think that they lack, you look at other teams around the league that are really top end, and they have game breakers, right? Like they have guys who you go out and they just do good stuff all of the time and score points and just go. And I love Brady Tkachuk, but I don't think he's quite on that level, right? Like if Brady Tkachuk were B to someone else's A, and maybe that's Tim Stützle, but not yet. It's hard to tell what that's going to look like at the end of the day, but I do think that with Ottawa, there's a lot of really solid, useful NHL talent that they can sort of fill their roster out with and work on, maybe they flip some of these guys for a higher end guy that comes up during the draft or something else. Like I don't think Ottawa personally, as bad a season as they've had, I don't think they're in a position to say, well, we can draft top 5 this year and still not be great next year and see where we're at in 2023. It's like, no, I get the feeling that they should be in the position with all the picks they've made and everything that they should maybe start thinking about where to go from here rather than continuously, churning down at the bottom of the standings. I think that they should start going up, and hopefully if they start giving the kids a little more ice time and a little bit more opportunity and bring in maybe some bigger name person in the offseason, then they can start down that road. But it's not all doom and gloom. But I think they are still lacking a bit of that like big boy punch, kind of thing at the top end of your lineup.
Yeah, and I mean, in my opinion, when you look at the top line, you have Norris, who's already hit 30 goals. He's continuing to go with scoring there. Drake Batherson's missed a lot of time after that Aaron Dell hit on him, but he would have been definitely on pace to get 30 goals plus. Brady Tkachuk is nearing that 30 goal mark this season. So with that top line kind of set in stone, I think Tim Stützle really needs some help on that second line because he's been playing with Formenton and then like Nick Paul or Chris Tierney or whoever. So yeah, I think it really starts at the top, and they need to really start getting more talent in the top 6 there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big ticket, right? Like, and I think I'm not particularly worried about Ottawa's ability to defend. Like, not because I think their defenders are particularly like phenomenal defenders, but I think that their defense they're great possession players, or at least the guys that they have in the system that they could play are great possession defenders. And guys like Sanderson, I think the biggest thing about Jake Sanderson is just how good of a possession defender he is. He's a great defender. but a really, really good puck possession defender as well, even if he's not a guy who scores as much as like 60, 70 points a season, which I don't think he will, but as a guy who can just possess the puck really, really well. Thomas Chabot, same thing. They've got a lot of those guys, and that's a good start, but the puck's got to go in the net. You got to have multiple lines where you can sort of go tell the guys to just go out there and they can push results and score points. And like you said, like Stützle, Formenton, and Nick Paul or whatever, like even if you add Drake Batherson to that, like that would help. But again, it's more about like you kind of, to win in the NHL, you kind of need like premier, a guy or two that can like do the job, and just run a hockey game. And I think they're almost there, but not quite.
Yeah,
I think to your
agree.
point about Stützle's season kind of not being completely up to snuff and stuff like that is fair. And Kachuk's game breaking ability isn't necessarily there, and all these sort of things. I think with Stützle though, like I don't know, I might be speaking out of turn, but I love what I'm seeing out of him in the last 15 games. Like he has turned a corner, and then another one. He looks so good right now. He's utilizing his hockey sense, making open space for passes, but his shot is actually like, it's still deadly, and it's just being stopped by good goalie.
And it's good that he's actually using it now.
Yeah.
He wasn't using it for a while.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with Stützle, and this was kind of the thing that I picked up on pretty quickly last year when I was watching him a little bit, is that I think his defensive game has come a ways, and I think that's true in the data as well. Like, I think that he is a guy who is pretty much the epitome of, well, not the epitome, but a really good example of a guy who, when he's young, you see a ton of talent. Like, you just see a kid who just is gifted in terms of skill and pace and all of these things. But the criticism that I had of him in his draft year was that that's basically all he had. If he didn't have the puck, there were times where you're kind of like, well, I'm not, he's kind of zipping around the ice and flying around. And once he gets the puck, you can possess it and move around with it and cut inside and do a whole bunch of stuff and dangle the pants off of DEL defenders or whatever. But there's more to the game than that. And he was a pretty low volume passer, loved to hold on to the puck himself. And I found that if he had time to work up speed, then he was certainly a pretty quick guy. But on defensive rushes and everything, he showed that his strength or lack of strength was a bit of a problem, and just ability to sort of pursue guys consistently. And I feel like in the NHL that got exacerbated, and he had some pretty poor defensive numbers. And in the games I saw of him, it's like a guy gets a foot or two on him, and Stützle is almost a non-factor and can't really sort of keep up there. But that seems to have improved, and it's almost as if he's sort of taken the foot off the gas pedal a little bit and has sort of stabilized himself. And that's kind of where you want him to go, is like, look, you have all of these tools, but knowing when to use them is a different story, and like knowing when to sort of exert yourself and when to sort of all those things and make a read of the ice and anticipate defensively. Like, all those things I think have gotten a little bit better. But I mean, you're right. Like, there's still, you can never ever discount just how awesome and fun a guy like Tim Stützle is. And I think that's a guy who's going to score a lot of points for the Senators if he has some better players to play with, if his second line role right now is kind of going to stick there.
And what's great is he's now a center. He's now transitioned to that C spot. And I mean, when I at the start of the season was like, well, if he's playing wing, we need to draft a center and all this stuff. And now I'm like, draft whatever you need. We got two amazing top 6 centers. We're good. It's all gravy. And I find his like he's taken strides like during the season, and analytically we're able to see that his defense isn't absolute dog poo. It's something good now.
You said that, not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's normal. I mean, like most players, even elite players, they go through that, like finding their way in their second season, even not into their third or fourth. I mean, only true freaks of nature like McDavid and Crosby come into the league and dominate at 18. I mean, most guys, even your Nathan McKinnons, they hit that sophomore slump. And it's exactly like you said, Will. It's like they need to figure out okay, I know I have skill and talent. I've shown it throughout my young career. Now I need to figure out how to play with the big boys. And they do take their foot off the gas, and you usually see that production drop a bit as they need to figure out how to be a team player, how to compete, in the dirty areas on the ice, and how to put together a complete game. And then once they have that, that base to build from, you'll start to see, their natural ability be unleashed again, and you'll start to see those numbers go up. And I think that's, it's certainly something that I'm not worried about as a Sens fan. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any cause for concern whatsoever with Tim Stützle, right? Like I think he went through a really long slump this season where he just was not scoring a goal.
Yeah.
And it got
couldn't buy a goal.
Yeah, and it got to the point where like his shooting percentage was so low for so long where it's like, okay, no matter what happens from here until the end of the year, his numbers are going to look worse than they should technically be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was such a comically long period of time that at the end of the year, you look at him, it's like, well, Tim Stützle only had 20 goals. It's like, well, I don't know, if just a couple of more shots went in, he might be a 25 goal scorer and no one would bat an eye, right?
And I joke about really good goalies making really good saves. Like that was the case. I remember being like, how has he not scored at this point? Like, why is Laurent Brossoit playing at an elite level against Tim Stützle? Like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there were a lot of times early in the season where you could see he would like hang his head high, like he couldn't believe it. Some of these saves, and
and so I think it is good. It's smart. It's important to note that also he is converting to be a center. And I honestly, like when I was watching him as a junior, I never really thought that he'd be a guy that I would put at center. And last year watching him in the NHL explained a lot of the reasons why I wouldn't put him there. Like I just felt you would take away the special things in his game to put him in a position where he had to do more responsible stuff defensively. But, obviously like with a guy that talented with enough time and patience and everything you want to call it, yeah, sure, you could make him work down the middle. And Ottawa does lack that sort of top six sort of center. I mean, I really like Josh Norris. He's a great player, but like a 1-2 punch up front down the middle, they kind of didn't really have that. And I didn't expect Stützle to be that. But if that's what he is, like if he turns out to be their 1C for the rest of his career, great. It's a bit of time, but but again, in my head, it's like, well, let's assume Tim Stützle went somewhere else in the 2020 draft. Like I'm trying to think of some other team that had to pick that high, but that team,
LA.
Yeah, like let's say that team just planted him on Adrian Kempe's wing or something, like one of the more underrated. I love Adrian Kempe, and if you put him on a line with Adrian Kempe on the wing and just said from the get-go, like the defensive side of the game, let Adrian worry about that. Like go out, skate, shoot, pass, score points, like go nuts. Like where we would be now if that was the situation. But Ottawa seems to be taking a different path of like, all right, well let's round out his game, put him up the middle, work through the problems and just sort of get him to a comfortable spot. And so, if that's the difference between him being like a 100-point offensive winger and like a 80-point good defensive but really good offensive center, then so be it, right?
Matt's cat is wilding right now.
Oh, really?
All I see is like this little black head pop out.
So there's a cat behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
it was a cat the whole time. Matt
what
isn't a human being.
What kind of design in your room is that? It's like a projector screen, but there's a shelf behind it.
I think it's just a drop down. You're muted, Matt.
He's
so
muted
I'll
himself.
explain your house that I've never been to.
Good.
So you just
it's just a blind, but my cat was up there like hitting against it, wreaking havoc. So I had to just
sick.
give him the eject.
Cat life.
Yeah. Anyway, I know Bennett wanted to ask something here.
Yeah. So I wanted this discussion of Stützle has been great, and we're thinking about who the Sens took in the 2020 draft and how they're panning out. And I think a lot of Sens fans were disappointed, myself included, in many ways, with the 2021 NHL draft that the Sens had. But I think we're starting to see a few positive storylines emerge from some of our later picks. And someone that I wanted to touch on was Zach Ostapchuk, who is having a pretty good season for the Giants in the WHL. He's got 41 points. He just scored a hat trick the other night. Have you seen some improvement in his game, or perhaps any of the Sens 21 draft class?
I've only seen a little bit of Ostapchuk. I mean, I've seen Tyler Boucher here and there, especially after coming back to Ottawa. I mean, I've seen Ben Roger play in person this year. I saw Chandler Romeo play in person this year. Both of those guys, I just don't see it. I mean, I've seen Chandler Romeo be one of those guys who's like an actively negative impact on his team. Like he takes every time I've seen him play live, he takes at least 2 inopportune penalties just for no reason, which I love for sadistic reasons, but it's, but I mean, I think when I was on your show, I kind of liked the Ostapchuk, Johansson, and Latimer picks. And I mean, Ostapchuk I thought was a reach, but I can see kind of why they did it. And I've always really, really liked Ostapchuk as sort of a north-south, relatively simple rush offense guy. Like he's big, he's physical, but he's got some skill, really creative playmaker. I think a lot of things in Vancouver this year with the Giants, like, I mean, I've watched a few of their games this year because I'm a huge fan of Fabian Lysell when he's playing there, and he's been remarkably good on a team that isn't so good. And Ostapchuk started out really, really slow. Like I think the back half of his season has been a lot better. Just seems to have sort of regained, whether it's confidence or whatever. He's figuring out how to work with line mates that might be new. Like they had Justin Sordiff on that team and he's gone. Like that's a huge loss. So I think he's gotten better. I mean, I think my projection of him hasn't really changed. Like I think as a bottom 6 NHL guy that can play center or wing or whatever, like maybe there's something you can get out of that. He's got a lot of talent, and I think once he sort of, gets more comfortable with how physical he can be and plays a bit more of that side of the game, then maybe you have that sort of bottom end of your lineup NHL player, maybe middle 6. But slow start to the year, and I think a lot of that, he plays a style of play where I feel like if it's not working, it really doesn't work. Like he doesn't really have much of a lateral game. It's very north-south. Like I'm going to get the puck in the defensive end and carry it up the ice myself and just bulldoze it in. And you can get away with that, but if it's not working, it's really not working. Yeah. So again, in the last few months, I haven't seen a ton of Vancouver, but whenever I have, you still see kind of what he brings to the table. And, there's guys this year that kind of remind me a bit of him last year, but yeah, he came up to me late last year. I've liked him. And so far, from what I can tell, he's had an okay season. It's gotten better. I'll also say that as the year's gone on for sure.
Yeah. It just brings up the whole like, oh, maybe Ottawa should have drafted Lysell and not Tyler Boucher. But I mean, I remember I DM'd Will. I was drunk at a cottage, and they drafted Tyler Boucher, and I was like, "You've got to be fucking kidding me!"
It's a bad place to be to find out news like that, my friend.
Yeah, it wasn't good. And then like an hour later, the whole Logan Mailloux thing, like, just not a good draft overall.
Bit of a weird night.
Yeah,
I saw Bob McKenzie's tweet. Like, he was like live tweeting the first few picks of the 21 draft, and it was like he was like talking about the Senators. It was like, oh, expect a reach here, and I saw that. It was about 45 seconds before the pick was announced. I just see Bob McKenzie say, "Oh, Sens are gonna reach," and I just felt like like "Hello Darkness, my old friend," like starts like playing in the back of my head. And I see we drafted Boucher. I just like put my phone down and just like pressed my face against like the window. Yeah. It was just like,
and when the Bob father does it, like that's it.
Yeah.
Like it's legit. It's as verified as it can get. But on to like positive prospects. I know that during the 2020 draft. A lot of people were kind of questioning the Senators' first round. Stützle being the obvious pick, other than maybe Raymond. And then we were hoping to get Raymond at 5. And then we got Jake Sanderson. But one of the not forgotten first round picks, but he was definitely taken in the first round that people think he went in the second. Ridley Gregg. I know at the time your projection wasn't as hot on him. How do you feel about him now?
I get asked that a lot, and I think that things generally haven't really changed for me. I mean, I look at Ridley Gregg, and I think he has a lot more, based on what I was hearing about him. Let me start over. With Ridley Gregg, okay. He was the one player in 2020 that I didn't do any data on, and when I do that stuff, I get a much clearer view of what a player is. But I had seen a lot of Ridley Gregg, and I thought, one, this guy is a reckless hockey player. Like, this guy will make mistakes, and he's not the type of player that, as a general manager, like, I personally would want on my team, because I feel like he puts a target on your team's back, right? Like one bad hit from Ridley Gregg and the rest of the game, anyone on your team is fair game. And he does that a lot. Like and he still does. Like I've seen games where he steps on the ice and within 2 shifts he's gone for the game. And it's like you can't, well, not too, I'm exaggerating, but like really quick. And you can't have that. Like he's a player who I think pushes the envelope. And at that time in that draft at 28, for example, like I'm just looking at the names that were still available, like Maverick Bourque. I don't know if he'd be a very good senator, but that guy was in my top 15, and I still feel like I would take Maverick Bourque over Ridley Gregg. John Peterka, JJ Peterka. I loved JJ Peterka that year. I thought he should have been in the first round, and I thought he'd be a really good senator. Like Peterka Stutzla, they played together forever. That's a no-brainer. I think he plays the way that Ridley Gregg plays, but in a safe and manageable way with a little bit more projectable skill. Like I think Ridley Gregg's going to be a really good, third line NHL guy, chipping in physically more than he needs to, some good skill as well to score some points. But like, I think his big thing is going to be sending messages through his physical contact. Like, I think he's pretty quick and skilled and everything, but I don't know, for some reason, I just have this feeling that he's sort of going to have issues in the NHL scoring like he does, especially getting around bigger guys. Like, he's not the biggest hockey player around, and to play his style of play, we'll see how it works in the NHL. I don't know. But I think, again, when things like this happen with guys like Gregg, it's like, it isn't so much that I don't like the player, right? Like, it's not so much that this player is bad or a bad draft pick, but there's just, at that point, 6 or 7 other guys that I think are at least in the same discussion as, like, I would probably rather have them, and JJ, they had 2 cracks at Peterka and passed on both.
Yeah.
Like, there's a few examples of that. I was a huge fan of Marat Kuznetsov. I thought he would be an interesting Ottawa Senator, but who knows what the story is there. Like, that's the other thing too, is you don't know what NHL teams have good relationships with these players, or which players even bothered to say to Ottawa, like, yeah, I'd like to play for you. For all I know, half of these guys that we're talking about could be like, if you draft me, I don't really care. Like, I don't want to come to Ottawa. Like, I'll go somewhere else, which, I mean, I think that kind of thing happens, but Gregg's going to be fine. I still feel like there's other players that I feel like I would have taken ahead of him.
So you would definitely use him as a trade chip for a bigger deal.
Depends on what you're getting, right? Like, it depends. If there's an NHL team that absolutely loves him, and like, I don't know who's going to be available at this year's draft. Like, usually at the draft, there are people available that you wouldn't expect. Yeah. And, Ottawa has cap space. Who knows what the situation with ownership is going to be next year in terms of the money they can spend and whatever. Like, if they can add, like, let's say, for example, like, it takes Ridley Gregg and a first round pick to land player X, and you also know, let's say, for example, you're going to sign Nazem Kadri, full 8-year big money contract. He's your big get of the offseason for the Ottawa Senators. That plus, would you move a Ridley Gregg and a good first round pick? Because that's what the last time that I'm thinking of something like that happening was, like, Jeff Carter. Right, where they traded like Wayne Simmons, I think. Or was it Wayne Simmons and Jeff Carter? I don't know. Anyway, it was like a first round pick. Oh yeah, it was Wayne Simmons and a first round pick, I think. I don't know. Anyway, it was a long time ago. But the point is, like, I think if you can land that sort of Jeff Carter-esque player for like a Wayne Simmons, who is he was a good middle six offensive physical guy, which I think Ridley Gregg kind of fits that mold, riding that envelope. You kind of should think about making that trade, especially if you might have a really, really high-priced, good free agent coming to town that can really give your team a boost. So it depends on who it is coming the other way, but I mean, I'd think about it. But I feel like Ottawa would prefer to keep Ridley Gregg, knowing what I know about the Senators.
And I think this is actually a good time to show our first comment of the evening from Nick. And Nick is asking if you will think that in terms of the prospects that I assume the Sens already have on their team, that we haven't seen much of or anything from yet, do you think will be a surprise difference maker for the Sens going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, in terms of guys that I just have liked that maybe the public hasn't seen a ton of, like, I really like Oliver Johansson, the guy they drafted out of Sweden last year. He's going to be a slow burn. Like, he's going to be a couple of years. Like, you're going to really.
He's like a Jonathan Dahlin.
Yeah. Well, he plays for the same team, right? Yeah. So they might be teammates next year, from what I have heard. So that would be interesting. But Johansson is a guy who I really liked last year. I thought that, they picked him a little high, but sometimes you just got to pick a guy because you like him. And I think that that's a guy who you don't hear much about. He had a really good year in the junior league in Sweden again this year for a team that isn't, particularly fantastic, but he did really, really well on that team and scored a ton, and a lot of the even strength scoring he was involved in, and just a lot of good signs that you want to see out of guys like that. So hopefully he can make the jump if he's in the SHL next season, or I think he'll be in the SHL next season because his team didn't get relegated. That's one that jumps to mind. I'm trying to think of others. I mean, there's a lot of being a guy on prospect Twitter all the time. Like you from Senators fans, you hear a lot about a lot of different guys. But
no, come on, Sens fans.
Yeah. I mean, I still think that Shane Pinto, we haven't seen enough of him to really know what he is, but he's a guy who I think that once he comes back and he's healthy and he's ready to go, he's a guy that I think has kind of sort of publicly sort of fallen off a little bit from people talking about him. But, and I thought that the talk about him when he first came into the league was a little insane, but I feel like there's a happy medium there where it's like he could be a really good middle of your lineup guy, really effective. You don't understated, but like really solid. And I think that's another one that at least these days you're not hearing a ton about.
Yeah, and I think definitely before he got injured, in the small sample size that we got to see of him, he was really great on the penalty kill. He was a great face-off guy, and he did show some good playmaking ability. But yeah, he's only got, I think, like 17 games in the NHL.
Yeah, barely.
So,
yeah.
And that's
he's still going to be a rookie next year.
So. Exactly. So he'll be able to, I guess, see what he can do. I assume he'll start on the third line behind Norris and Stützle. So, we'll see what he can do next season. But Timon came through for us and said that that Jeff Carter was traded for Jakub Voracek, a first-round pick that became Sean Couturier, and a third-round pick that became Nick Cousins.
Damn, that Sean Couturier one.
That's a heck of a trade. I remember that draft. I remember that pretty clearly, and being kind of amazed that Philly got Couturier. Like, Couturier was like the man that year, and he just slipped. And so good for Philly, but I don't know. We'll see. But to go back to that question, I think if it were me, like if there's a team that's like we need Ridley Gregg, like right effing now, I think about it and see how far they're willing to go to rip him out of my clutches if I'm Ottawa.
It's a weird situation having all of these graduated prospects to being legit NHLers, and then you have these like 3 or 4 prospects that have a shot at making your roster again, and then the rest. Like Chandler Romeo, for example, also top tier name, but
I think he's just going to be like an HL journeyman. I think
exactly.
Belva's going to love having that dude to be like, the de facto, you're picking on, young Jim Bob there, then Chandler's just going to come in and absolutely destroy the dude.
Well, because right now it's like, your echelons are like the Lassie Thompson, the JVD, the Ridley Gregg, Sokolov, and like your Venti. Those are the 5 guys that, you hope are going to make the NHL roster in the next 2 years. I'm really not sold on Tyler Boucher like whatsoever.
Well, it's hard with him because I've seen some people who go to games and he'll score like a goal and have 2 assists and he'll look solid. And then, I only took in 1 game in person this year and I took notes of every shift and posted on Reddit, and it was not a great game for him. Now, it was the second game on a back-to-back, and most 67s players that game did not have a good game. And I think Luca Pinelli was like the only one who stood out as having a good game. The things I noticed, though, is Tyler Boucher, he has a hell of a shot. That's for sure. If he gets the puck in the slot, he can fire that thing. And he's also very physical on the forecheck, and that's nice to see. He just does a lot of standing around, and that's what worries me. And like, I think, and I joked about this on his Discord server, but I was like, I felt like I couldn't get an accurate scouting report on his skating because he didn't skate a lot. And then Will's like, well, I think that in and of itself is
that's probably a good scouting
skating.
report.
Yeah.
So I was just like, yeah, and so that worries me. And I think at the time I really wanted the Sens to draft Wallstead, and it does nothing for us to really go back and talk about it now. I know at the time everyone's like, oh well, we don't need to draft a goalie. Like we have Gustafsson, we have Sogard, you can never really have too many goalies with high potential, or at least guys who you think may be a starter someday. I think you just kind of have to go for a guy who, I don't want to say is surefire, but gives you the best odds, or has shown you a lot at a higher level of play than another guy. And at the time, Boucher had been injured for most of the year. I think he had mono at one point, or COVID, or both.
Yeah, there was a few things going on there.
Yeah, and he also had a physical injury as well, which
Yep.
I can't remember now, but
I think it was a knee.
leg or something. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it was a knee or something.
yeah. So it's like it's hard when the Sens draft a guy like that, and normally when the Sens well, I shouldn't say normally. Aside from last draft, when the Sens have gone after someone, like if you look at the 2019 draft for Ottawa, at the time there were a lot of question marks. I think now some of those question marks are starting to ease as we see, Sogard is getting NHL games. Lodin is now coming over to Belleville. We'll see what he can do. Was Kastelik from that draft? Yeah, he's looked really good on the fourth line when he's been given minutes by the Sens. He looks like a guy who should be a mainstay on the fourth line next season.
Yeah.
Shane Pinto, I think, was the second rounder that year. He should be good. We'll see what happens. Him coming back from injury. Lassie Thompson, in the minutes he got at the NHL level, looked pretty decent. Had some rough nights, but he's a rookie. There's a lot of guys that are really showing something from that draft class. 2020, of course, Ottawa had 3 first-rounders, so you expect them to at least hit on a couple of those. And with Jake Sanderson coming in, it looks good. Just the 2021 draft class is just, I usually give Ottawa the benefit of the doubt, but passing on guys like Ratu and Stankoven, who now has over 100 points in the WHL, passing over those guys for Ben Roger and Ostapchuk, like it's hard, but
it's hard to justify.
They like to draft Beeg. They like Beeg. That's why That's why I got this from the shop, because the Sens love to draft Beeg, and I'm going to wear this to the draft this summer.
Attaboy.
Speaking of drafts, now we've got the 2022 draft coming up, and I mean it's all over the place. You have so many names that could be possibly going at number 2 to number 15. Like, they're all over the place.
Yep.
I mean, other than Shane Wright, do you have like somebody you really like from this draft, or somebody you expect to be almost a surefire superstar?
Well, I hesitate to call anyone a surefire superstar, because a freaking superstar in the NHL is a god at hockey. I don't think there's any of those this year, personally. Like, I it's funny. Like, it's funny when you watch hundreds of players in detail for multiple years overall and focus so much on the guys at the top end, and think back to what you thought and had written down about these players years later, right? Like, I remember watching Alexis Lafreniere, and everybody was anointing him as like the future of whatever. And I was one of the few people who were watching him and was like, yeah, this guy's got a lot of talent, but there are some habits that are kind of iffy here. And like, there's some question marks here. So like, there might be an adjustment period. And I think people are getting a little bit a little bit too hot on their seats here for this guy. And like, I thought he's had a pretty decent year this year compared to last one, and he's been fine, but that's a kid who went first overall. And already there are guys that went later than that, where you look back and you're like, say what you will about, the uncertainty at the draft, but like, at this current moment, other players have had, comparable careers. And at the time, anyone but Lafreniere in the 1 slot would have made you a pariah. It would have made you crazy.
Yeah.
So over the years, I guess what I'm saying is I've kind of learned to sort of throw caution to the wind and just go, you know what? I'm just going to say what I think and see what happens. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But, like this year, Shane Wright is the guy, I think. But beyond that, I mean, I think that there is a discussion for other guys to go first overall. There's no one that I'm looking at and going, this guy is for sure going to be a rock star. But I'd say there's maybe 10 guys. I'd say at least 8 where I'm going, I could see a really, really impressive NHL player here. Shane Wright's one of them. Logan Cooley's another one of them. David Jiricek, assuming his injury didn't explode his ability to play hockey, I think he could be another one of them. Slafkovsky, I think with patience and things going right, I think that could happen. Savoy, same thing as Slafkovsky. Like if things go right, like really right, and you're patient, then sure, there could be something there too. I still love Brad Lambert. That's the guy who I think people are maligning for the wrong reasons. And again, I in my head, the reasons why I like him, like he's number 2 for me still. I think the reasons in my head, they make sense to me. And I don't know if I know people, I was talking to an NHL scout yesterday who thinks I'm like insane. Like he's like, you having Lambert like as the number 2 guy makes you nuts. And I'm sort of going, yeah, but like the way I see it is when I look at him, I see a guy who's in the wrong situation. Like he went from a bad situation to a worse one this year. He's a guy who I think needs good players to play with. Like it literally took 2 shifts at the World Juniors.
Yeah.
With him playing with Samuel Hellenius and someone else. I can't remember who the other
Wasn't
player
it
was.
Kemmel?
No, they were not playing together.
Then it was probably who's that
Hellenius.
Leaf, the Finnish Leaf prospect?
Oh, Hirvonen. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it was Hirvonen.
Yeah.
So those guys were on the ice together, and it took about 2 shifts for you to go, okay, there's Brad Lambert.
Yeah.
And you do not get that in the league at time that I've seen him. You just don't get that. He is trying to do everything on his own. And if teammates aren't utilizing him, he's useless. And they don't. I've seen them, like he's so fast and so quick to get away from people in the neutral zone, away from the puck, and guys will just dump the puck right by him. Like they'll just lift it over his head and just dump it in and get him to win the retrieval, which he does because he's Brad Lambert. Like people question his defensive ability. Well, like, yeah, because when you're out for 2-minute shifts because you can't stop a cycle in your defensive end, like what's he supposed to do? Like 5 guys' jobs? Like his team is not very good with him on the ice. And part of that, I think there's part of that can be traced to him. But he's a guy where I go, look, you've got unbelievable speed and skill combo. Like he's probably a higher pace player than Shane Wright. I think he's more of a skilled player than Shane Wright. Shane Wright's, I think, a little smarter and like can push the game and pull the game and the pace of the game around a lot and just has that sort of awareness of the game that I think Lambert has issues with. But man, like you watch him play and Lambert's one of these guys where it's like if he's in the NHL with the right guys, it might look like nothing's happening, and then before you know it, the puck's in the back of the net. Just really quick, really surgical kind of guy. So I'm still a huge fan of him. I get why people are skeptical, and I think when people look at the point production, it's a lot easier for them to be skeptical. They can go, well, it's not working because he's not scoring points. But for me, I'm looking at him and going, well, he had some of the most spectacular data I've ever seen in a prospect, no matter where they're playing, when it comes to getting pucks in the offensive zone with control. Best of anyone I've ever tracked, especially let alone he was playing against men. His line mates were like bottom 6 AHL guys last year. I've seen breakouts with Pelicans this year where all 5 of them are in a horizontal line going up the ice. Like nobody breaks a puck out like that. And he's not supposed to be playing that way. Like that's not, they're playing him on the wing. I don't know why you'd play Brad Lambert on the wing with how fast and how skilled he is, how much he loves open ice. He's not going to grind it out along the boards, but he tries and he does pretty well. So he's one that I've really liked. The other one that I'm really, really banging the drum for is Gleb Trikozov, who is just, I know Matt knows my love for Gleb for sure, but, setting aside all the obvious pink elephant in the room things with Russian players and Russia in general right now, I think Gleb Trikozov is one of the most exciting players in the entire draft class with how well he can shoot. The playmaking goes along with it. He's in my top 10. Like, I think if things go right for him, if he comes over to North America right away to get away from whatever's coming in Russia in the next 2 years or whatever, if he can manage, if that's what he wants to do with himself, especially considering he's about a month away from being eligible for next year's draft, I think that there's just a ton to work with there, and he's just a ton of fun. I think he scored a goal per game in the playoffs in the Russian Junior League this year.
Wow.
So I love that guy too.
And his name's Gleb.
And his name is Gleb. Yeah, that's a great plus.
Soft sell for me.
Which Will made into an emote, I have to say.
Yeah, I did. So I think this draft overall is kind of softer and harder to predict, but there are exciting players at the top end. Like if you're Ottawa, I think your odds are what, 6th or 7th
Yeah,
or
right
8th or
now they're
something.
sitting at 6.
I think we're actually going to win the lottery. I have a feeling.
You
Maybe.
know what? My uncle who cheers for the Habs, he's like, I have friends who cheer for the Habs and they're like totally tolerable. My uncle cheers for the Habs and it's insufferable. And he's like, oh, Shane Wright, because he went and caught a Frontenac's game this weekend.
Yep.
And he's like, you'll look good in the bleu, rouge et blanc. And I'm
Yep.
like, no, I want him now to go anywhere other than the Habs.
Yeah.
Arizona, I'll be like,
Oh my goodness.
sorry, have fun in the desert. Like,
Yeah.
I just
that-
can't.
In that college arena next year, it's going to be
Oh my
great. It's
God.
going to
That's
be great.
Everybody's like, "Oh, are the Senators going to move?" It's like, no, the
no.
Coyotes are playing in a ball hockey arena. Settle
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Imagine if the Sens started playing at Carleton or U Ottawa.
Yeah.
that's
It'd be
essentially the
hilarious.
equivalent. Like,
Yeah. Going down to U of T to play their games.
oh my God.
But yeah, I mean, so I think for Ottawa, regardless of if they win or lose the lottery, like I get the feeling if they win the lottery, you'll get a really useful hockey player of some kind. If it's Logan Cooley in Ottawa, I think that gives them something that they kind of could use. Just raw offensive firepower.
Yeah.
Tons of fun, tons of skill, tons of speed, all that fun stuff that you love to see. And he probably would be, if he develops well, one of the more exciting players on that team, I think. But if you don't win the lottery, like Brant Clark went like 10th last year to the Kings, right? Like this is another one of those years where other teams will think whatever they want. Someone might take a reach somewhere. Someone like Matthew Savoy might be there. Would Ottawa draft Matthew Savoy? Part of me says no. A big part of me says no. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's the person I'm scared. I'm scared of Geeky. Like,
yeah, like I'm expecting like Connor Geeky, Nathan Gaucher. I'm expecting I don't know, Leon Bixell, like just some guy that can play physical but has mobility, and you can sort of hope that things develop right, because that's kind of the formula with a guy like Boucher. We'll see.
Another player that I really think fits like that archetype that the Sens like is Cutter Gauthier. Like, to me, he seems like that kind of player that the Sens would draft. He's not a huge player, but he's got that fierce game where I've read reports about him that he's a guy that teams don't like to play against. I like Joachim Kemmel, but I know he's slowed down from how he started the season. But he's another guy who's been said to play the game in a fierce way. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see who the Sens draft, because I think if they do go into the draft and don't win the lottery and end up at 6th, it'll be interesting to see if they go forward, if they go defenseman, center, a winger. There's a lot of options, and I'm hoping that the Sens can't really go wrong. I think it's just a no-brainer to take the best player on the board there and just roll with it.
Yeah, and it's really hard to predict, especially with Ottawa, because even when things seem like a layup, they choose a different direction. And that's even look at their second round picks last year, right? Like, I don't know. I like Zach Ostapchuk, but I was kind of stunned that Logan Stankoven was not an Ottawa Senator. Like, that one was a bunt to me. Like, you have multiple chances to pick that guy. Like, the only thing I can think of is they just have this blanket thing where it's like, if we're looking at North American players, if they're small and they I don't think this is true for Stankoven, but if you sort of blanket them all as like, if you're under this height, we don't think it's going to work in the NHL. Like, that's not how we want to play. Like, I get that. I get that philosophy, right? If that's what you want to think and do in the NHL, then sure, don't draft players that you don't think are going to fit in with your system. But I looked at Logan Stankoven, and a really good example of, like, I get why you want Ostapchuk, but I also look at Stankoven and see how he behaves when guys like Ostapchuk are all over him. Like, yes, maybe Ostapchuk, gets bigger and stronger over the next few years and becomes more effective, but Logan Stankoven's quickness and skill and first couple of steps to create separation and everything, it's just lights out. Like, that will also get better. Like, those things can also improve too. So it's hard to gauge what someone like Ottawa is going to do, because I kind of see where they're headed. But someone like a Matthew Savoy, if he slips to 10, part of me is going to go, or 6 or 7 or wherever Ottawa's picking, it's going to be like, he might slip another spot, and Ottawa might have something different in mind, which, could work out. You mentioned Cutter Gauthier. I wouldn't draft him that high. I think people are ranking him real high, like out of but he's got really interesting tools. Like I don't see a ton of evidence that he's one of these guys where it's like, man, we're playing Cutter Gauthier, that sucks. But in terms of skill and finishing and just the shot quality he's up there for sure. But I have questions about him, and I think that he's going to be a guy who, maybe a second line offensive guy in the NHL. But I think that if Ottawa plays their cards right at 6, like someone could be there, and I think they have multiple first round picks. Right?
No,
like,
they only have 1 first. They have 2 seconds and 2/3 though.
There you go.
So they could trade up.
And the second round, I think, is one of the most undervalued areas in the draft in the NHL these days. Like second round picks are undervalued in my opinion, especially if you play your cards right. So who knows? Someone small and skilled and fast and fun might be available in the second round, and they go that direction just once, right? Like just that one time, they go in that direction and see what happens. But we'll see. I'm excited. I can't wait to see what the rabbit they pull out of their hat. But we'll see.
And if Logan Brown plays one more game for St. Louis this year, Ottawa gets their 4th round pick back, so they'll have 11 draft picks this year.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Also, I just did a bit of a look in the last 3 drafts, and like the smallest player the Sens took was a 6-foot player. Like,
yeah. See, there you go. There's the evidence of like the blanket statement, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at like, I don't think Slafkovsky's going to be there at 6.
Which makes me sad, but I understand.
Yeah. Like maybe like a Liam Ugren,
Well, but the thing is, and Bennett's gonna talk about it, is like there's defense that are above 6 feet.
There are.
Yeah, I mean, but you also look at Ottawa, and it's like, well, where are they going to play? Like, I usually will tell people, don't worry about what you have on your team anyway, because it's going to change in 3 to 5 years when that player's ready. But in Ottawa, like this, you're hopeful that a lot of the defensemen who are on the team now are still going to be there in 3 to 5 years. Like, are you basically
Delzato? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Michael Delzato, Josh Brown extended 5 more years.
He's on Boston. We're okay. He's on Boston.
Oh, right, they traded him.
Yeah,
right. They got rid of him.
Yeah.
But like you know what I mean, though, right? Like you have a lot of young defensemen, and it's like if you add another high end defenseman, you're kind of going, okay. So in 2022, we drafted another really, really high level defenseman that pushes, say, Lassie Thompson out, who we drafted in the first round, 3 years ago. So thanks for coming by, Lassie. Like, good to know you. Bye. Or Jacob Bernard Docker. Like, thanks for being a part of the team for like 2, 3, 4 years. But we moved on to the next shiny object on defense, right? Like, at some point, there has to be a moment where you look at, especially because we were talking about off the top, like my read on Ottawa is that they're kind of lacking firepower. They lack like FU offense. They don't really have that. They have good offensive players. They have perfectly adequate offensive players, but they don't have like FU offense, and that young defense hasn't quite melded together, right? But there's at least the talent on defense. So you don't draft on need all the time, and I'm sure like if David Juracek by some miracle is there at like 7 or 8, then yeah, that would be a great pick and be an interesting pickup. But again, it's hard to tell unless we know who's available at the pick when it's draft day.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Like this year, I find that there's no real like drop off. Like I think you have Shane Wright, and I think Logan Cooley could fit up there, in my opinion, in like the 1-2 of who's going where. And then I think after that, from like 3 to 8, it could really fall any which way. Slafkovsky probably, I think 3, or 4, but like in general, I think there's like that next tier after those first 2 or 3 picks. I think it's really up in the air. It'll come down to what team wants what player type or which position. So that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my list now, and I would say that there's about 20 to 22 guys where I'm like, yeah, if this guy went in the top 10, like I would not be surprised. The right team looking for the right things. Like I have Pavel Mintyukov at like 18, but if Ottawa goes up there at 7th overall and goes, we're taking Pavel Mintyukov, I'm going, okay, like I get it. I wouldn't do it, but I get it. And like, but there's a bunch of other guys where they're in the same boat there, and it's like I can see how this could work out for you. There's a bunch of them. So yeah, you're right. Like it is a bit of a mishmash, especially at the top. So we'll see what happens, but it's an interesting year. Like every year, it kind of seems to be this kind of way where there's like groups of players that kind of all, sometimes you end up with guys like Brant Clark or Dylan Gunther, who are just the ones left over from that top group, or Cole Sillinger, or even by that example.
Yeah.
But this year, I think that extra group is even bigger, right? Like once you get past even Shane Wright, like is Logan Cooley there at 6 if Ottawa doesn't get him, right? Like I think there's a world where that's possible, but he's under 6 feet, so who knows if Ottawa would even do it. But I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibility, right?
You guys hear that beeping?
Oh yeah.
If somebody has their phone on, just put it on mute.
I'm just gonna toss
Sometimes
mine.
it picks up electronic interference. Will just smashes his phone. It's just gone.
Just threw it against the wall. It's gone.
What was I gonna? Oh yeah, okay. So I was gonna say, if you had the choice to pick any guy that you think should be ranked between 5 and 10, if you're the Sens, which guy do you think would be the best fit for the team going forward?
Based on what I want the Senators to do. Oh, see, now it's not my fault. I threw my phone across the room, so haha. Unless it's my watch, and then I'll just throw that across the room too.
It may have been Bennett.
Uh-oh. It's that background.
I don't think it was me, but
I also
took my
don't
phone
know.
anyway because I wanted to join the phone throwing club.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Okay, so anyone between like 6 and 8, you'd say, ish? Something like that?
Sure. Yeah.
Man, it would be really cool if Logan Cooley were an Ottawa Senator.
But you think he could go like that late? Because I think he's gone before 3 or 4.
I think in terms of talent, it's entirely possible. But I mean, I'm just putting on my NHL team hat and going Yuri Slafkovsky, David Juracek, even Connor Geeky. I can see NHL teams just going, yes.
Don't do that to me.
Or I don't know. I'm just saying that crazier things have happened, right? Like Sean Couturier went 8th overall, like we said earlier, right? So I mean, but again, I'm just going to answer the question because I'm stalling. But I think Logan Cooley would be number 1 if he's available there. I mean, I'm still really bullish on Brad Lambert, and I think he adds something that Ottawa doesn't really have, which is like raw pace. Just pace.
And he's Finnish, and we actually draft Finns.
Yeah.
He's a center. He has that offensive upside, and he's over 6 feet.
And I think Ottawa's Finnish scout. That's the thing, though. It's if Ottawa, because they have that one Finnish scout. I can't remember. One of the Rutus is Ottawa's Finnish scout, and I know
it's not
that
Jarmo or Tuomo.
It's Mikko.
Yeah, it's Mikko.
Okay. Yeah. But I know, like, for example, Ratu, they didn't draft him. They had how many chances to draft him?
Yep.
They 3 chances to draft him before the Islanders took him, and they didn't. And so I think they put a lot of faith in what Rutu's opinion is on guys. And now they drafted Järventie. I know he's a goalie, but they drafted Marilainen, both Finnish guys, same draft, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see if they do go for Brad Lambert, or if Lambert even falls to the second round,
or if it's a Kemmel.
Or
Joakim
well. Kemmel in the top 10. I think it'll be interesting. If the Sens pass on those guys, then I think that Rutu sees some red flags about their game. But if they draft one of those guys, then maybe Rutu sees something that he really likes about them, and he's like, guys, listen, like, I'll die on this hill for either of these guys.
Yeah.
So I think that will be interesting to see.
And I mean, I think it is possible that Brad Lambert doesn't go in the first round. I'd be disappointed in myself and shocked. I think I would be just disappointed because I feel like that would be a really big overcorrection. I am looking at the list of Finnish players that Ottawa has drafted, and since they have drafted 4 of them since 2006, and they all came in the last 6 years. So, and I know from a lot of the Finns I've spoken to about Brad Lambert, because I need to know if they're seeing what I'm seeing. Like, they're just blanket statement, he's not good. Like, it's just he's not good, and or at least something along those lines of like, he has no hockey sense, he has no awareness, he has no this and he has no that. He can't produce in a bad pro league. Like, nobody hates their own country in hockey league like Finnish people. Like, it's bizarre. But I also look at Brad Lambert and go, but I'm seeing what I'm seeing. He was producing last year. Like, he produced well as a younger player. Something is going differently here. Like, he didn't just forget how to play hockey overnight. And I've watched a lot, because when this happens, like, I still have imposter syndrome. I go, okay, like, what are other people seeing that I'm not? Like what could it possibly be? And there are some things here and there for sure. But if I'm thinking about the Ottawa Senators, I don't think there's a lot of guys like Brad Lambert this year, and I think they do need a guy like Brad Lambert, where they have a lot of these sort of physical 200-foot power guys who have some skill, they have some offense, they chip in defensively, they do all the things DJ Smith wants them to do, but they don't but they've also got Tim Stützle, but he's not playing that high octane, high offense scoring points style of play. Like they're trying to get him to be something more well-rounded, which is fine, but you're also going to need to score goals. Like you're also going to need guys who you can trust to go out there and score, And so I feel like Brad Lambert, if you like Brad Lambert with Tim Stützle on his wing, on the second line, right, would be interesting to at least experiment with. If you keep Ridley Gregg, you could throw him on that line too. Like maybe there's something there. I don't know. But I look at the rest of the guys in this top energy range. Like you mentioned, Joakim Kamel. I don't think Kamel would be a great fit for Ottawa. Like I'm really, really, I was one of the few people at the beginning of the year watching Kamel score points and going, I don't think this is going to be sustainable. Like, I don't think this is going to happen. Like, he's scoring. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Joakim Kamel take the puck outside of the middle of the ice, like from the faceoff circle, carries it outside the faceoff circle, turns around, puts a wrist shot on from the blue line. Like, no one in the NHL does that. And in the Liga, that puck goes in 1 out of every 15 times, and he just got lucky a few times. He's done that a couple of times. He's got a great shot, but like that's how he was scoring, was all these really low percentage, really weird bounce plays, just kind of going his direction. And Brad Lambert, I think his on-ice shooting percentage has been like 2 this year. Like it's just brutal. And I feel like over a bigger sample, I know, and it sounds like I'm making excuses, but I feel like over like a multi-year sample, there's going to be, it's like Ratu last year where people were writing him off. And my whole thing with him was, I think he just needs a hug. Like, I think he just needs someone to give him a pat on the back, tell him everything's going to be okay, get him a change of scenery, and things might be different. And with Brad Lambert, I thought that was the case with Jyväskylä early in the year, but I only think that even more now that he's moved. Like, he went back to his hometown team. I just think that, going back to the original question, I've gotten off topic here, but I think that he's a great example of something that I think the Senators kind of lack. And if they can sort of set aside what they want their team to be like throughout their entire lineup and go, let's just get a guy that can go out and score for us and like be our scoring guy that can be a catalyst for guys like Stützle. So it's not just Stützle's the offensive guy and everyone else needs to work off of him. It's like, why not add multiples of those types of players on your offensive lines and see what happens? But I don't expect that to be what the case. I expect Lambert to go like 27th to Toronto. And
oh God, no.
Well, like something like that, right? Where it's just like some team that is really, really good and doesn't really need a bunch of really high octane prospects just goes, let's see what happens with this kid. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And maybe that's what happens.
But I think like it's kind of interesting because Ratu was supposed to be top 10, right? And then he ended up falling way into the middle of the second round. So I'm kind of wondering if it's a similar situation here with Lambert. And I know your colleague Sam McGilligan's really high on Lambert. He wrote a very long and detailed piece on
painfully long.
It was honestly the most
Exhaustive.
in-depth profile of a single prospect I have ever read. I couldn't get through it all. I ended up just skimming sections, but
neither could I, man. I do this for a
very
job. I love Sam.
Poor Sam. Sam, we love you.
I love
Even though you're a Habs fan, but we can get past that.
Yeah.
No, but it'll be interesting. The other thing that Ottawa values a lot, though, is character. I remember they had one of those inside the war room for one of the draft days, and Dorian's sitting there, and he's like, "Is he a low character guy?" And it became a meme, obviously, instantly. Sens fan were like, "Yes."
I love that.
So that's another thing. If there's any player who has, low character or off-ice issues, Sens aren't taking them.
I
don't know
if that mean?
I don't know. I guess they wouldn't have picked a player that the Montreal Canadiens drafted, but
sure.
But with Brad Lambert, I don't know if he had off-ice issues at all. I heard like there were rumblings, but it's mostly hearsay as far as I'm aware.
I don't, anytime I hear someone say off-ice issues and not specify what they're talking about, that's a good indicator that it's just some skilled player that maybe isn't producing and they're just using a blanket term to go, well, that's the reason why. You know, like I remember people said the same things about William Nylander when he was at that age.
Yep.
You know, people said I live in Toronto, like the exact same, and people still say that crap about him, like they still do. And he goes out there and does everything Leaf fans could ever want. But anyway, I mean, I think with Lambert, I mean, everyone was sort of bringing up someone, I forget who it was, but someone tweeted out like, oh, this is the fourth team he's played on in 4 years, you know, or something like that. And so, and I had some scout reach out to me and be like, well, that's a sign that they whatever. And I'm going, well, think about it from the player's perspective, right? Like, think about it from their perspective. Brad Lambert has been he left his hometown team, or well, the team he grew up playing for, to play in pro hockey in Liga. Like, Jyväskylä spent a lot of money to bring in some high-priced free agent youth guys, or transfer them in, and play them right in the Liga right away. And he played pretty well, but his team was absolutely terrible because they played full of young kids and couldn't win games. And a bunch of them left, like Joni Jurmo left, a couple of them left. But then, you know, this year, his team is even worse. Like, Jyväskylä was even worse. He was playing with bottom 6 AHL guys who were playing in like with the Abbotsford Canucks last year and playing like bottom 6 minutes. Or Utica, I think it was still Utica for Vancouver. But anyway, and then so then, you know, he says in interviews like, well, the team I used to play for needed offensive players, so they came to me, and they needed to make a playoff push, and so they came to me, and I'm not going to say no, right? Like, it's the team I used to play for. I've got a relationship, and they want me to score points for them. Like, sign me up. Like, I'll do that. So to me, that seems much more reasonable than a player just being so much of a jerk that they just couldn't wait to get rid of him and transfer him somewhere else. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I've never heard anything meaningful about him or whatever. And frankly, I also don't really care. Like, how many North American players have troublesome hockey parents or stuff that we never even hear about because it's more culturally, you know, it's a cultural thing to like keep your mouth shut about that stuff about North American players because they're the good old boys from, you know, wherever they're from in Canada or the States, whereas it's a lot easier to be, you know, talk that way about guys from Europe or something where they're seen as a little bit different, right? So
yeah, we're even seeing that conversation like in the last 2 weeks with this whole like Stützle diving thing in Gallagher.
100%.
And like, you know, oh, why was he on the power play like a minute later? It's like, I'm sorry. And we had this conversation in the last podcast. People were glorifying Patrice Bergeron almost dying in the Stanley Cup finals.
Yeah.
You know, he legitimately could have died. And, you know, Stützle goes down on a knee-on-knee play that was very clearly a knee-on-knee play. You know, it was an accident. Stuff happens. Gets up, goes to the bench, skates around a bit, comes back. That's what hockey players do.
Yeah.
And are expected to do and are roasted if they don't do. And then it's like a weird situation. It's like, oh, like, you know, Simon, how do you win? It's like you're supposed to be a man and tough it out and like play through stuff. And then it's like, oh, but like, you know, he was down on the ice too long. He should have been really injured. It's like it's total bullshit. And
it's like he's
it's just
like, and then he was out for 2 games and Habs fans claimed that he was faking it or the coach was covering for him. And I was like, no.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to be deranged people on the internet, right? Like, that's just a fact of the matter. But, like, it is true. Like, I mean, I've been around long enough to know that there are implicit biases with this kind of stuff, especially dealing with kids. Like, I always remind myself, and I see it a lot on the internet, like, a lot of people talk as if these guys are 30, you know, like they're my age. And it's like, well, I don't know. If I were 17 years old and people were talking about this, like, this way to me, and, like, something that I want to do as like a dream, right? Like, it's my dream to play in the NHL. I'm 17 years old. And like, especially for someone like Aatu Ratu last year, it kind of like, I never met him. I never spoke to him, but I think it was Scott Wheeler who did an interview with him directly and was like, yeah, he was feeling like mental health things because of the expectations put on him by media. Like us, like North Americans going to him when he was 15 and being like, this guy's the next big thing in Finnish hockey. And it's like, well, okay. But then the second something doesn't quite go right, it's like, well, why aren't things going right? Like, why are things all messed up? Like, whatever, you know, and Brad Lambert, like, it's the same kind of thing. Like, people are questioning his, you know, I've seen people say like, oh, he can't think on the ice. Like, he just has no hockey sense at all. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like that's another one where it's like you say attitude problems. I say like when people say hockey sense, like you got to specify what you're talking about, right? Like there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different things that you could consider related to hockey sense. So it's like a communication thing, right? Like what are we talking about? With Tim Stützle, for sure, that was some bunk, especially ironic coming from Brendan Gallagher, who can be a bit on that side of things once in a while too. But again, like people don't give Michael Bunting the same pile of crap when he's out there exacerbating trips and stuff to draw penalties and antagonizing the opponent and kind of just like being a guy where other players might not respect it so much. So it's out there. That's for sure true. And I think for some guys, it'll get in your head, right? Like it's hard to tell who it will get inside the heads of, but I get the feeling that that's not a situation where you go to a 16 or 17-year-old kid and go, sorry, this whole thing that you want with like professional hockey, yeah, it's not for us. Like you're not our guy because you're too mentally fragile. It's like, no, you got to sort of give them, it's like give them a hug, like pat them on the back, like try to get them back on the right, get on the right path because like they still can play hockey. Like I talk about this with guys on the Locked On Sharks podcast all the time. Like Aatu Ratu did not forget how to play hockey overnight. Right? Like Brad Lambert did not forget how to play hockey. If there's something else going on that's affecting him in whatever way, you got to figure it out. It's your job to sort of figure it out and get it sorted out because he's too good to be bad. So we'll see. And I bet if he were in Saskatoon right now, he'd be, if he was playing with Tristan Robbins right now, like he'd probably have 100 points, you know, and Saskatoon would be very, very good. And we'd all be thinking nothing was wrong. I've seen it so much of him in Finland that I'm convinced that something else is going on rather than him being just not good. So people might need to be a bit more careful with how they talk.
Well, we don't want to keep you too much longer because we've had you for a while. I didn't even realize.
It's all good.
Bennett was going to throw something your way. We'll do the last audience question and then we'll call her a night.
Sweet.
Yeah, so we briefly touched on Simon Nemec before. We just want to bring it back to him briefly here. So Nemec is tearing it up currently in the Slovak playoffs. Does that make him more favored? Do you think his stock is increasing right now?
It's a good question because it touches on a whole other concept of like evaluating prospects. Like points are important, right? Like points are the reward of good play generally, right? I've seen a lot of Simon Nemec all year, like ever since last year. Him and Philip Machar I've been watching a lot because I like them both a lot. And I think Nemec, he plays a style of play in my view that's like good enough to drive good results in the league he plays in, right? Like the Slovakian league last year, I saw a lot of it because of Brandt Clark. And Brandt Clark did some of the similar kind of avenue kind of things as Nemec was doing, at least offensively. But when I look at Simon Nemec, I see a player who I think will have no problem scoring points outside the NHL. But in terms of like his big thing is quarterbacking pucks up the ice. Like he loves to skate with the puck, push it up the ice. And I think he is pretty freaking good at it. Like I think he's a top 15 guy this year. But the thing about points and like especially defensemen and especially in the playoffs where things are pretty slow, or not slow, where things are quick, like the series are quick and they don't play that many games. Like especially for defensemen, bounces one way or the other, little plays here and there can go your way and pucks go in the net, especially for playing on the power play, which he has done quite a bit this year. I like Simon Nemec. The more I think about how Central Scouting had him at 6 in Europe, I kind of see where they're coming from there. It's more about his projectability, right? Like, I don't think he's an NHL defenseman next year. I want him to work on his skill level. I want him to work on driving more speed, skating up the ice. His defensive game, I think, is a big work in progress. If he's not using his stick, he's uncomfortable, and that's only going to take you so far in the NHL. I like him though. I think he's my third best defenseman in this year's draft, and he's really, 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 really close behind number 2. So I think he's going to be a perfectly fine like second pair guy. But I at this point I've seen him so much that I don't really think that much about. Well, he's scoring a lot in the playoffs. He's doing this in the playoffs. In these last couple of games, he's done this. It's like, well, guys don't do like their guys' trajectories do this. They don't do this. Right? Like it's not like, oh, they're in the playoffs, therefore all of a sudden they take a huge step in their game. It's like sometimes things just go the right way for a little while. I think he's a good player. He's a top end player in this year's draft for sure. But recent changes and everything haven't really changed things a ton, at least not for me.
So who is second?
I love Seamus Casey. I think that guy, give that guy,
Seamus,
yo,
let's go.
we baby Seamus Casey. I love that kid. I mean, I think you could get him in the late first, early second for sure. Like, but again, talking about how when you look back at draft rankings and look at things, like they look ridiculous within about 2 years, regardless. So my whole thing is screw it, just say what you think and see what happens. And I watch Seamus Casey and go, like, right now he's not there, right? Like, he's not the 10th best player in the draft right now. But I look at the skill level he's got, the creativity that he shows, the quickness on his edges, the ability to sort of create space, pass pucks up the ice, hit targets, the quickness with which he can sort of process the play and get a pass off. If that guy learns how to carry a puck a little bit better than he does and create better speed, and he's going to Michigan, I think, right? He's headed
Naturally.
to, he's headed to Michigan. So he's going to get a chance to play there for a couple of years and develop. I think that there's going to be a heck of a defenseman there, and the development path is pretty straightforward. A lot of it is sort of strength and speed based, and those things you can sort of develop. And he's already got the quickness, the turns, and the skill and the creativity to sort of produce offensively. And I think that it's a little more projectable than a guy like Nemec, even if Nemec, I think, is a better forward skater and a better puck carrier now. It's like if you could blend those two players together, it would be great. But I'm going to lean in the direction of the guy who shows a bit more skill and creativity and sort of puck management than Nemec does, at least in a projectable way. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Seamus Casey.
Only because we're on the topic of defenseman, I'll ask you one more. Where do you see Ty Nelson in this year's draft?
Oh, geez, Matt. I mean, you're going to need to book me for another 45 minutes here, man.
God.
Ty Nelson, man, he's bizarre. So I don't know if any of you watched the Top Prospects game, but
I was able to catch a little bit, but
I thought it was a really good example of the pluses and minuses of Ty Nelson. Like that guy, that guy, the guy has a bullet. Like the guy can shoot the puck, especially with his wrist shot. Like he's got one of the hardest wrist shots of a defenseman in this year's draft. Like it's insane. The guy's got bullets for days. but I want him to be like Luke Hughes kind of hockey on defense, right? Like carry the puck, pass it, like just always take ownership of the puck and do not give it up. That's your job. Just control, pace, skate it up the ice, do your thing. And he just does not do that. I think he leads my entire data set for uncontrolled offensive transitions. Just firing pucks, no one's there to catch them. North Bay seems to play a lot of Mike Babcock hockey, like where they'll park guys in the neutral zone and their defenseman will stretch pass to them and they'll tip it into the offensive zone and then someone else will go for the retrieval. Like Babcock loved that kind of hockey. Pucks in deep, retrieve them, and work hard to get them back, right? And I think that that's what Ty Nelson is doing, but that's not his natural style of play. Like he's really, really skilled. So, I think you're hoping that he can turn a corner and sort of become the puck possessing offensive defenseman that you think he could be, but you also sort of see a guy who doesn't have a ton of speed for a smaller defenseman, tries to play physically, defensively, but almost has trouble doing so. He's really stocky also for a kid that's 5'10". Like it almost makes me feel like cutting down a little bit and sort of lightening his frame a little might help sort of become quicker and shiftier and a little bit more, I guess just quicker all around, because he kind of started the season really hot scoring points and has kind of tailed off as the year has gone on. And I think part of that is his game has changed a little. Part of that is guys are kind of figuring him out. Like you kind of can get on him pretty quickly. But man, if he finds some space in the offensive zone, like the guy can score and it's pretty remarkable. I just hope he gets more chances to do so. Like if he's a early second round pick, I wouldn't doubt it. I don't have him in my first round anymore, but he's not far off. Early second would be a really, really interesting pickup. But I think there's a very wide range of possibilities with where his career could go. He could be a top 4 power play quarterback defenseman in the NHL one day, or he could be a top 4 power play quarterback defenseman in the AHL one day and never really get into the NHL. So it depends on who's picking him, where they're picking him, what they want to do with him. But I think there's a player there, just one of the trickier players to evaluate, I think, this season.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Because I was like, oh, we went this whole thing not talking about Ty Nelson because I'd seen him at one point ranked in the top half of the first round, and yeah, since then haven't heard a lot about him. So thanks for that. Yeah, we'll answer. So Nick posed another question to us in the chat here, and it was, what was everyone's wildest unpopular draft take? Laugh being iffy doesn't count. That's pretty funny. Yeah. I mean, anyone can kick us off. I actually saw this question and I was like,
I've been
about it.
thinking about it for like half an hour.
I mean, I don't even know if I don't know what my unpopular take would be. Like, I'm not
looking
even...
up all my old ranking lists just to make sure I get the right one here, because I'm sure there's been quite a few. I mean, this being a Sens podcast, I mean, me not being a huge fan of the Jake Sanderson pick is a good one, but I also still look at my list and I go, yeah, there's a bunch of players in that draft that I think the Ottawa Senators could benefit from, right? Like Anton Lundell as an Ottawa Senator now.
Yeah.
You know, like nothing against Jake Sanderson, but like...
But I also think that the Sens really needed another defenseman, because you had Shabbat Zub to start the season, and they were so good together, but the other four defensemen were so bad that DJ Smith had to split up Shabbat and Zub, because he's like, yeah, they're playing great, but if you have your two best guys on one pairing, the rest of your team's getting caved in, then you got to split up the talent. So I think Jake Sanderson coming in is going to be a huge boost, especially with how he's, come along development-wise, offensively especially. And then after that, like, you're hoping that JBD and Lassie Thompson pan out, and then I guess Tyler Clevin on the left side. Like, I think they kind of really needed Sanderson at 5, and I guess maybe my unpopular take was, if Ottawa didn't draft Jake Sanderson at 5, I actually probably would have wished that they had, because my rankings for who I wanted the Sens to get, and I discounted Laugh because I assumed Ottawa wouldn't get him. It was Stützle, Byfield, Raymond, Sanderson. That was my, in that order, who I wanted the Sens to get. So, but I can't think of an unpopular one.
I mean, I'm ready. I was going to say I had Owen Power at 7 last year. I'm really excited for him to score 4 points tomorrow night against the Toronto Maple Leafs and pump him.
I remember your list, because I remember that it was, I don't know if it was you specifically, but I know there was some draft. Oh, it was the mock draft that we did, I think, with your Discord server, and Owen Power didn't go till 7 or something.
Yeah.
And everyone in the comments was reaming us like, what? Owen Power should be in the first 1 or 2 picks, and they were going off. That was hilarious.
Yeah. I guess, again, similar to Jake Sanderson, I look back a year later, and I'm going, and again, I've seen quite a bit of Michigan this year. Would I take Matthew Beniers over Owen Power still, based on what I've seen? Yes, I think I would. Would I take William Eklund over Owen Power right now? I think so. Yes, I would.
Ooh.
Jesper Wallstedt. I had Jesper Wallstedt ahead of Power. It's hard to tell now, but he was one of the better goalies in Sweden this year, and he's 19 years old. That's amazing. I had Fabian Lysell up there. He had a great WHL season, but that was a hot take that maybe we'll see what happens. And Luke Hughes was the big one. I had maybe Owen Power I could put ahead of Kent Johnson in retrospect. That's not the end of the world. But I look at Luke Hughes, who is almost a full year younger than Owen Power, and I'm going, I remember watching Owen Power with Chicago the year before he was draft eligible, and watching Luke Hughes with the NTDP at the same level when he was draft eligible. They were basically the same age. I would have taken Luke Hughes ahead of Owen Power, and he had a phenomenal freshman year. So it's yes, these takes are hot, but again, it just goes to show, just because a player is locked in at 1 doesn't mean that there's a bunch of other guys that could be in the same conversation, and you kind of get into splitting hairs. But that's one. I think Power at 7 last year, and me having Lambert at 2 this year might be the craziest one of all, right? He might go in the second round. I had Atu Ratu in my second tier last year at 12, and he went in the late second. So yeah, who knows? I fully expect that kind of thing to look silly on draft day, but again, we'll see in 5 years, who the victorious one is. Because if it's not me, sure, but we'll see.
I think most recently, I was I would take anybody over Sebastian Cossa.
Yeah, you really, between the two goalies there.
I hate his goaltending style. His goaltending style technique is big. That's it. And
yeah, there it is.
I think one of the things that we saw in those World Junior games was there were technically sound goalies that were smaller that could do the exact same job that he could do, except, you know, he got lit up in a preliminary game. Yes, it's the World Juniors and you get to see that much, but like people having him over Wallstedt were asinine. And I remember having some guy was like, Kosa is the clear-cut better player and on Twitter. Like he was going at us over the Senstennial Twitter. And I was like, I'm not even going to bother with this.
Too, because he's a regular. Love this.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't see Kosa. I kind of feel the same way about Mads Søgaard. I think Mads Søgaard actually is better technically than Kosa. And when Detroit took him, I was like, okay, I clearly know nothing about this because Steve Yzerman's a wizard. But
We'll
like, you
might be right.
We'll see. I think Wallstedt is going to be like in the tier of like Spencer Knight. And,
well, yeah, like Andre Vasilevsky was what, a teens pick? Like,
yeah, he was 19th.
Yeah,
I remember Ottawa. I was like, "You take." And same with Jake Ottinger. Like, I loved Jake Ottinger.
I did too. Yeah,
and he went before we could pick him. Like, he went 10th. But goalies in the first round isn't that crazy to take.
Ottinger didn't go 10th.
No, that was Jack Campbell.
I swore Ottinger went
in the 20s.
26.
Really?
Yeah.
He went 26?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That was the Lassie Thompson draft, no? 2019?
Yes.
No,
2017.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so we couldn't pick him because we got
Shane Bowers at 28, baby.
The one guy who hasn't played in the NHL yet.
Hey, they traded him for Duchesne. You know what? That Duchesne trade has now come down to Bowen Byram for Lassie Thompson, 1-for-1.
Yep.
And I saw somebody who said Bowen Byram is going to be better than Jack Hughes.
Oh God.
And I was like,
okay,
that is an unpopular.
Injuries have really derailed, I think, his development. So I'll give him that. But Bennett, did you have an unpopular draft take?
No, not really.
On the spot.
I've been racking my brain for 30 minutes, like other Matt said. It's like, I really got nothing. I mean, like, I guess like all of my hot takes about like the draft and the Sens and stuff are not that unpopular by Sens standards.
Yeah,
it's like it accounts to like I don't care what the NHL website says. We have 3 scouts, and there's one guy in Finland, Ruutu. There's one guy watching the national team development program in the US, and there's like whoever their head scout is, and that's it. Like,
and he's just texting his old playing buddies, like, "Hey, you have a kid now?"
yeah, exactly.
Did that guy play with like Shabbat's roommate or something? Like, let's get them in here.
Yeah, you guys cheer for the Sens. Like, you guys got enough draft unpopular hot takes just from what the team does. Like, honestly, you can talk to me all day, and the team's going to come up with something better.
Well, if you look at their past drafts, like 2017 was pretty solid, all things considered. Like getting Formanton in the 2nd round, Batherson in the 4th round, and now Batherson, only 30 odd games this season, but he's over a point per game player. He's absolutely, before the Aaron Dell injury, had broken out, and I think was approaching like stardom. As a player, which for a 4th round pick is insane. And they've had some hits, and Shane Pinto in the 2nd round. I think that was a nice pickup. We'll see how he develops, but he's definitely projecting out well. I think last draft though, Trent Mann basically went ego mode and was just like, I've had some good drafts, so watch this, kids, and then just like went at it, and so like
then had a terrible one.
He put this sweater on, and he was like, "It's time for Beeg," and he just went with like Romeo and Ben Roger, and he said, "Yeah, screw you, internet scouts," and then threw a couple pies over at Will and took the Beeg players. So,
well, we'll see how Tyler Boucher is when he's playing for Belleville in 6 years. So,
God,
yeah, exactly.
Hey, he'll be their captain.
I'm half joking.
He'll be their captain.
Yeah, I can't hate him. I don't hate Tyler Boucher. Just still hilarious to dunk on that draft pick. It's wild.
Yeah, I honestly, it's going to follow him around. That's the sad thing. I think.
Yeah,
is that he's gonna have that pressure. If he was the 10th overall pick, and he shouldn't have been drafted there. And I think he himself was absolutely shocked to be picked
Yeah.
that high.
And
So that's
sorry,
tough.
finish your thought.
No, it's a tough situation for him.
What makes it worse is the guy next to him is in the NHL and like doing really well already.
Yeah.
And he's like Cole Sillinger playing center. Like hey Ottawa, like you want an NHL center, like
And they had his dad
right
for a
effing
bit.
now.
Everyone was like, yo, they had Sillinger's dad. He's a lock.
So,
But no, you took a backup goalie's son. A backup goalie.
those are the
Come
worst
on.
kind of sons.
Okay, sorry, side note before we end, did you know really Greg and his dad, they basically said like, yeah, don't draft me to the Flyers because it's just awkward.
Yeah.
Like they didn't want to be like nepotism, like Chris Draper drafting his son for Detroit.
Or Shane Doan.
Or Shane Doan drafting his, oh man. Okay, at least those are more meme picks than Ottawa.
Or Martin Brodeur drafting his son Anthony.
Yeah.
Oh
Or
yeah.
In the
everybody
the last round.
or everybody just drafting brothers because they want the reincarnation of like the Sedin twins or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taylor McCarr.
Taylor McCarr, Colton Dock to Chicago. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, all right,
times.
we're getting off track here.
Love it.
And also, Ray was in that mock draft, and he commented that mock draft was funny, and it was great.
Oh, it always turns out.
Honestly, for the banter, it was great. And I think Lee Sell was like the #1 pick.
Yeah,
Anyway.
someone took Lee Sell as a big pick first overall. Yeah.
So great. Anyway,
Oh my
okay.
God.
Will, thank you
It
so
was a
much
mess.
for. It was great. Will, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always a blast to have you on. You're one of our favorite guests for sure.
Oh,
So
thank you very
we're
much.
looking forward to somehow bribing you to come back on after the draft. And yeah, if there's anything you want to plug, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to bribe me, you can go to patreon.com/scouching, and you can sign up for whatever tier you like. You get access to a bunch of different stuff, data cards, track data, production data, data sheets for hundreds of guys, merch discounts, Discord server that Matt's a part of. It's a good time. You could also, you could if you were at the tippy top. Yeah, you get merch discounts.
Okay.
Yeah, but not you.
Lowly
No,
peasant.
that's for the corporate partnerships.
Okay.
But there's you can also follow me on YouTube at Scouching. There's going to be videos. The reports are coming out hopefully within the next week. Just
go.
working out some final stuff with the editor. There's
Sweet.
4 shot. They're in editing. We're getting there. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at Scouching. I'm not super active there these days, but that should be ramping up over the next little while as things start to get into draft season. You can also follow my work at McKeensHockey.com, part of the video team there with Sam McGilligan and Greg Revac, who are also very good resources. We're working on some stuff between now and the draft. And yeah, I'm also going to be in Montreal for the draft. So if you're in town, give me a shout and we'll, grab a cup of coffee or something.
We can deliver a box of these to
Yeah.
the Sens management at the
Oh my
draft.
God.
How much product marketing have we done in this episode alone?
Don't worry, Will.
More than I've ever done. More than I've ever done in my life.
We made a backdoor deal. Okay, I'm a lobbyist. All right.
Sure, you are now. You are now.
Yeah.
I'm on this podcast, guys.
Signed in blood.
We had to pay somehow.
Oh boy.
All right. Thank you so much, Will,
Yeah.
for coming on. We appreciate you. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a great night, everybody. Go Sens, go.
It's time
Thanks
to
again, Will.
send them.
See ya.
Yeah. See ya.